Welcome back to another reading and correcting of Bottom Rung by me, Kindar, the Tiger Right, and Ty. Today we are doing chapter 26. The group they passed as they walked down the path item, the state they were in. Attacking another group continued this eyed them. Okay, this took in the state they were in and the shield Jackal carried. And the the tone wasn't set when I wrote this, even when I did the second draft. But uh, one, the phrase is clunky. Took two, and you know, the shield is the first really significant piece of loot that's taken out of the dungeon. So there should be a reaction. Energetic, energetically. Talk energetically. Okay. The group they passed as they walked down the path, eyed them. Took in the state they were in and the shield Jekyll carried, and talked energetically to among each other as they continued in their respective direction. Let's try this. The group they passed as they walked down the path eyed them, took in the state they were in and the shield Jackal carried, and talked energetically among each other as they continued in their respective direction. The two adventurers at the bottom eyed the shield. The adventurers at the bottom eyed the shield, but didn't comment or do more than raise an eyebrow. The adventurer behind the table had a sword at his hip and smoky dark gray eyes. Smoky dark gray eyes. Da, 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 da. I need to make a note of that because I cannot recall what element I'd linked to that. So we'll have to look into it. It's not relevant here as the adventure doesn't do anything, but I need to know what I was establishing here when somebody with those eyes come back. He took the 3 coppers, each of them handed over, as well as the 2 silver pieces and copper Jeff handed him. We're not done, the adventurer said as they turned to head to town. Tibbs wanted the horrible tasting potion so he'd feel better, and Jeff couldn't stand without Pien's help. He reached for he the adventurer reached for the shield across the table because I need to establish. I need to. The table's what's getting in the way, but Jackal was faster, stepping away. It's guild property, the man said. Bullshit, the fighter replied. It's dungeon loot that we earned defeating the boss. Everything found in the dungeon is guild property, the adventurer repeated, looking bored. You'll all get recompensed. Minus the guild cut, of course. The smile wasn't quite a smirk. Tibs hurt too much to ask what the R word meant. The R word was. Meant. Yep, there's an A there. Is that how this guild works? Jekyll yelled, loud enough for anyone all the way to the waiting area of the dungeon Loud enough for anyone all the way to the dungeon. Sorry, anyway, all the way to the waiting area of the dungeon. Could he what? Oh, revenge. Alright, all the way to the waiting. That's, I can take it out. So Jackal yelled loud enough for everyone could hear. For anyone to hear. So Jackal yelled loud enough for anyone all the way to the waiting area of the dungeon to hear. They swindle us out of anything we earned properly? He outright smirked at the adventurer as people moved closer. Us dying for the dungeon's not enough for you people? You expect us to line those fat rats' pocket too? 4 teams worth of people were close enough. Tibs heard their grumbling. Dawn was on one of them, eyeing the shield greedily. More were coming from the direction of the town, with one dressed in green running towards it. Towards it? Feels like that should be towards it. Listen here, the adventurer ordered. I don't make the rules, and neither do you. He didn't look as worried as Tibs thought he should. 4 teams weren't to be taken lightly. And more were on the way. One adventurer couldn't be that strong, even 3, if you included the 2 by the path. Oh, you clearly make them enough to do whatever you want with us, Jekyll replied. You want a shield like that? Go in there and get one yourself. You're powerful enough, I doubt it'll take you more than 5 minutes to get in, kill the boss, and get back here. Even Dunn was paying attention to the conversation now, Tibs noticed, although he had a calculating expression on his face rather than an angry one. Now the adventurer seemed to notice how many people were around Jackal. His expression darkened, and he opened his mouth. But a man behind all... But a man with... But a man... The tone... But a man with another tone... How did I cut this? And ended up pasting something else. Okay. But the man with the interest behind... Oh, actually, you know what? Yeah. Behind all of them spoke. What's going on here? He demanded. Everyone turned except Jackal, who froze and paled. If Tibs hadn't been injured, he might have turned too fast to notice. People moved out of the way of the approaching man, and Tibs saw him properly and immediately knew he hadn't been anywhere in the field when he looked around. So properly. Okay. People moved out of the way of the approaching man, and Tibs saw him properly and immediately knew he hadn't been anywhere on the field when he'd looked around. Well, the man asked. His eyes were bright and white, with his black hair cut short. He was massive, with a sword at his belt and a shield on his back, and a dented and tarnished arm. Yeah! Okay, this is clunky as bleep. He was massive, with a sword at his belt, a shield on his back. and his armor. You know what? That's going to be this. Is armor really dented and tarnished? The man was a fighter, and the kind who had no issues stepping in the middle of a fight when needed. This fighter, the adventurer put as much disgust as he could in the word, more than Tibs thought should be possible, seems to think he's too good to hand over the loot he found. We get to keep the loot, Jekyll said, not turning, and the voice cracking ever so slightly. Tibs tried to understand what was wrong with him. Turn around, boy, when you speak to me. Jekyll swallowed and did as he was told, slowly and looking at the ground. That's not where I am. Swallowing again, Jekyll raised his head and looked at the man. If Tibs hadn't been looking for something, anything to explain his friend's behavior, he would have missed the tightening of the eyes. The man somehow recognized Jekyll. Is that so? The man asked. That's what they said, Jekyll replied, voice cracking. Really? And just who's this day you speak of, boy? Jekyll swallowed again, but his voice was firmer. After graduating, when we came out, they said the guild took 10% of the coins. They never said anything about the loot. That's not true, the adventurer said. No one said anything about what was and wasn't covered. If the loot counts, Tibs said, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the pain, how come everyone here is wearing a piece? Only with a little focus he could see the changes that need to be taken into account. You could see you could see so much essence woven clothing. It obscured them. Obscured them. The man looked at Tibs, lowering his white eyes. No, they actually glowed. If he was surprised by his short stature, he didn't comment. His eyes narrowed. Then he looked around. The boy's right. Just about everyone here has something magical on them. Has the guild let the merchants start selling the stuff ahead of schedule? Where did these runners get the gold to pay for all this? He stared at the adventurer. Are the merchants here generous? He asked in dismay. The adventurer began. That's what they get for using rejects like you. He turned and looked the crowd over, mumbling something about the boy always being trouble. You lucky bastard get to keep whatever loot you find because these idiots weren't competent enough to impose the right rules, and I can't change them yet. So you better not. Definitely a comma here. So you better not miss your turn at the dungeon if you want to try it. As the crowd broke to return to where they'd stood before all of this, the man turned and fixed his angry gaze on Jekyll. If I'd known you were here in the middle of if I'd known you were in the middle of this, I'd have let this reject deal with you, Jekyll. Yeah. Harry is not calling Jekyll by that name yet. I don't know if Harry ever calls Jekyll by that name. If I'd known you were in the middle of this, I'd have let this reject deal with you, Jackie boy. You got to keep your loot too, but no dis. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. I don't care. Jekyll nodded. Was he trembling? Get out of here. Find a merchant before word of that spreads, and I'll find you in the middle of another commotion. Jekyll ran without waiting for the others. Tibs looked at the satisfied expression of the fighter with the glowing eyes and had the sense Jekyll was running more for his life than to sell the shield. 2 electrum coins. Tibs held 2 electrum coins, and they were his. He was rich. He had no idea of the numbers, but electrum was a step above silver, so that was worth a lot. The merchant had given them 10 electrum coin, 6 silver, and 4 copper for the shield, going on about the quality of the marksmanship, and how he could get a king's ransom for it if he found the right buyer. If a king was worth 10 electrum coins, Tib understood why they had so many soldiers protecting them. Even Karina had been amazed, and Tib sensed she wasn't straight. He hadn't met any sorcerers who had the feel of a street about them. Maybe having access to books required being rich or something. Tibs? Jekyll asked, nodding to Karina. What? He rubbed the coins together. It was so much more satisfying. It was a much more satisfying action than doing it with silver. Put the coins away. We're discussing having Karina join our team. Reluctantly, he put them in the pouch, running a finger over the amulet at the same time. Khrushchev placed a tankard before each of them. I hear congratulations are in order. You brought back loot. Can I see? We sold it, Jekyll said softly, looking at the table. Why? You know I wanted to see what dungeon loot was like. It was that or start a riot, Karina said, raising the tankard in thanks before taking a sip. Really? Khrushchev asked Tibs. He took one of the electrum coins out of the pouch and showed it to the server. I got two of them each. Yeah. No. Huh. We got 2 of them each. The 3 of you? 5. Jekyll said. Oh, wait a minute. The others went their ways afterward. 10? The servers eyed the coin, and Tibs put it away before he was tempted to take it. Khrushchev leaned closer to Jekyll's ear. Don't you dare get rid of yours before you let me touch them. Do you understand? Then he returned to the kitchen. At least he isn't angry anymore, Tibs said. Jackal drank half his tankard in one swallow. I'm not sure if that wouldn't have been a better thing. He said something about helping Tibs. What with? Karina asked. Tibs tried to understand how Khrushchev being angry at Jekyll might have been the better thing. First, Jekyll said, eyeing Tibs and nodding to Karina. Right, this was the current thing. He'd ask Jekyll about the other later. About the other one later. You have to agree to be on our team. You handled yourself well in the dungeon, so I'm for you joining, but there are responsibilities that come with the privilege. Privilege? You think highly of yourself, Karina chuckled. I'm not the privilege, Jekyll protested. I'd kill to be on Tib's team. You already are, Tibs said. Jekyll sighed with relief. Oh, good. I don't know if I'd be able to hide the body in this town. It's too small. Just throw it in the dungeon, Karina said. I get a feeling that depending on who it is, you could even ask the adventurers for help carrying it. Tibs chuckled. He could think of one person who had to have pissed off the adventurers considering previous behaviors around them. Considering his previous behavior around them. We divide the room cost equally among ourselves. I'm hoping we'll have 2 other members before the week's out, but otherwise it's going to be the 3 of us who pays. That's not going to be a problem, she replied. If we get 1 run a month that pays this well, money isn't something we'll ever have to worry about. It's what people who aren't street call coins, Jekyll said. I know that, Tibs replied. I've been here as long as you. Most merchants call it money. I wasn't sure. You're so straight. You might have... Ow! Tibs added the glare to go along with the kick to the shin. Karina chuckled. It's not funny. He kicked me in the knee. That hurts. I have cousins who behave like you two. Her face fell, and she became quiet. Her face fell. For a few seconds, the table was quiet. Then she took a breath and looked up. So money, coin, isn't going to be a problem. Don't be too sure of that, Jekyll said after draining his tankard. We got away with it this time because Hard Knuckle Harry can't stand breaking an agreement, even one implied by actions or lack of them. Like the adventurer not enforcing this. The loot is... Okay. Hart and Kalahari can't stand breaking an agreement, even one implied by action or lack of them. Like the adventurers not enforcing this. There's no comma here. The loot is the guild's property thing on stuff like Tibs' shoes and belt, your bracelet, and the things everyone in town wears. But you heard him. He doesn't have the authority yet. As soon as he gets it, I don't think we'll see loot again. And this might have been our last run, she said, pensive. The adventurer said something about things changing before we went into the dungeon. Is this what you think he meant? That Harry person? I don't know, Jekyll replied. He meant the dungeon, Tibs said. Bardic had looked in that direction. Okay, but even without the loot, I've gotten a silver and a few coppers, so we're still good, even if, as you said, money might still be a problem. She sipped her tankard. What else? Don't die, Tibbs stated. Tibbs lost a lot of people in the dungeon. To the dungeon. Yeah, I'm keeping that. Just have to read what's on the page and not what's in my head, Jekyll said as Karina's raised eyebrow. We all have, but he's gotten close to most of them in one way or another. She nodded. I'm not planning on dying. This isn't how I planned on doing it, but I will become a master sorceress. Actually, no, she does not use sorceress. Back here. I will become a master sorcerer. I hope that's good enough of a promise. Tibbs nodded, his stomach loosening. The last one is loyalty, Jekyll said. I don't know what your story is, and I'm not going to ask. It's yours to tell when and if you want to. But me and Tibbs were straight, him more than me. He had nothing before this. What I did have isn't worth talking about. This team, he trailed off, this team is the first thing that I've had I'm proud to call family. For us streak folks, family don't mean the same thing as for city folk. I need to slow down. He trailed off. This team is the first thing I've had I'm proud to call family. For us street folks, family don't mean the same as for the city folks. Family is something you make, not born into. I don't know if you noticed, but the guild doesn't seem to care about us all that much. Karina gave a wry smile. I have been here as long as you. I noticed. It means that we need to come before the guild. I wasn't completely certain until today, but now I know the guild's going to use whatever trick it can. But now I know the guild is, yeah, you know what? That's going to be a contraction. The guild's going to use whatever trick it can to use us in whatever way we let it get away with. It means secrets stay secrets, Tibbs said, no matter what. Yeah, Tibbs nodded. Jekyll nodded in Tibbs' direction, because we have one big one to tell you. Wait until you learn the rest, Tibbs thought. I have no loyalty to the guild, Karina said, but you don't know me and I don't know you. Trust's gotta start somewhere, Jekyll replied, then smiled. And I have a nose for those things. I trust you, Jekyll stated. All right, you didn't have to take me in, so I'm not going to let you down. We're a team. We're a family. The way you mean it. Jekyll looked around. The closest tables were empty, and after the stories of the loot they'd brought out, a lot of the runners had left for the field to see what else came out of the dungeon. Tibbs saw Krosef approaching and shook his head. The server headed in a different direction. You can go for it, Tibbs. He considered them, his family, and decided he needed to clear one thing before they addressed what he was trying to accomplish. He lowered his voice and told them about how he lowered his voice and told them about how the guild was charging them for the training they received, would demand payment in full once they reach Epsilon before they'd be allowed to go free. Would demand payment in full once they reach Epsilon before they'd be allowed to go free. Jackal excused himself and returned with 3 bottles of wine. I'm going to have to be drunk to process this, he said, filling their tankard. Karina looked shaken, but only sipped her wine, so Tibs told her about his need to gain an audience with air and fire to obtain his element. At her suspicion, he looked around, then produced dirt in one hand and water in the other. She stared for a few seconds, then drained her tankard. And this concludes chapter 26 of Bottom Rung. If you are enjoying this, please subscribe, hit the bell, share, tell your friends, hit the thumbs up. If you want to read the story, it is on Royal Road, the link of which is in the note, along with my Patreon, should you want to support me. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.